So, picking up where we left off, we'll turn attention to the League of Nations as part of uh, the Wilson's 14-point program. This effort to uh, provide for a framework um, for a post-war world following World War One. Again, you might say it's kind of the crown jewel of Wilson's 14 points. Um, uh, in essence, the league itself was a vision to uh, create an early apparatus for maintaining world peace through and by means of multilateral dialogue. For the part or for the League of Nations part and role in history, it was really almost ineffective from the start. The key reason for this was because Woodrow Wilson was the sole U.S. representative at the Paris Peace Conference. He did not include a single member of Congress, either from the House or the Senate. Um, and so, what this meant is that Wilson wanted to on the one hand, kind of serve as the single voice being heard from the United States with regard to what the U.S. interests were at the conference itself. But in hindsight, that may not have been necessarily the wisest decision because it is, of course, according to the Constitution, the U.S. Senate that ratifies treaties. And so when Wilson came back with a copy of the Treaty of Versailles, it's one thing to adhere, you know, the signature of the sitting president. But again, it's up to Congress, it's up to the Senate to actually make the country make that agreement binding. That never happened. The Treaty of Versailles was never ratified by the United States. This would mean that the U.S. would have to draft its own treaty ending officially the war with Germany, which it did. And so, really, the United States, as a result, was not bound by any of the terms, the clauses, or conditions of the Versailles Treaty, and therefore was not going to serve or be a participating member within the League of Nations itself, which was included within the Versailles Treaty. This demonstrates the United States' lack of faith in the international community in many respects. And it really kind of also speaks to the immaturity that the young country had um, as a major world power. One key kind of characteristic emerging from World War One is a situation in which the United States, for all intents and purposes, was a world power. They had a thriving population. They were a wealthy country. They had a massive base of industrial output, and they were, increasingly able to project a large amount of their authority and influence, power, all around the world. Well, that was all the benefits of what being a world power is. The United States by 1919, by and large, was not necessarily ready to take on all of the responsibilities of being a world power. And that absence um, meant that this was going to undermine the effectiveness of international institutions such as the League of Nations itself. That many members who did participate in the League recognized the fact that its uh, you know, sponsor state, creator state in many cases, the United States itself, was not even included and was not participating. And so, therefore, this meant that a lot of other member states were simply kind of apathetic towards any type of effectiveness that the league itself may have had. Moving on, we'll turn attention now towards the interwar years and specifically how the wider world is going to begin to adjust to a new post-war status quo. One of the best examples of this occurs in India. Um, in India, as much of the rest of the colonized world, we see a greater, more insistent shift towards vocal advocacy for anti-imperial sentiments, if not outright independence. Nationalist independence movements were coming from within vast global expanses, primarily within the British and French spheres of influence and their extensive empires. Again, many of these populations believed that their voices should be heard at public venues such as the Versailles at the Paris Peace Conference. That they had um, participated, met the obligations and the responsibilities of being a part of these European empires. They had come to the aid of their imperial host, and so now the time for um, compensation, the time for kind of a return on that honoring of that obligation was due in the eyes of many. Uh, to kind of summarize briefly, those voices by and large were not heard at the Versailles Conference, at the Paris Peace Conference. In many cases, they were sidelined. That the world powers, primarily the great powers of the world, Britain, France, the United States, among others, hoped to and planned to maintain the status quo as much as possible. Uh, and so many voices, nationalist um, voices, including some notable names such as Ho Chi Minh from Vietnam, hoping to win Vietnamese independence and establish an independent nation, went unfulfilled. In the 1920s, India, for its part, um, is going to undertake a decade that was marked um, an era of potential empowerment. This is where we see the process by which India, in particular, was going to uh, transform itself or undergo the process of achieving independence. Now, this is going to be a pretty long, arduous road, as it was for many um, populations under imperial control. Calls for independence kind of early were expressed with regard to the kind of concept known as Swaraj, which is roughly translates as self rule. One of the loudest and most kind of charismatic voices was that of Mahatma Gandhi, a non-vigil, excuse me, a non-violent um, activist who participated and kind of resorted to measures of civil disobedience to form as an act of protest, um, to bring attention to the plight of Indian independence, but also to serve to inspire future generations of protesters as well, not only within India, but also around the world. Mm, One of the most notable figures being that of Martin Luther King Jr. Here in the United States. Within the Western sphere of influence, within Western Europe, within the United States, there is an era of disillusionment which is going to grip those societies. In the United States, we see this with the last gasps, you might say, of the progressive era, which would include prohibition and women's suffrage becoming the 18th and 19th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. Again, prohibition that the U.S. population as a whole was not going to be, or the consumption of alcohol was going to be illegal, and that was a federal offense. And also, women earning the right to vote um, was also going to be at this time achieved. These were the last gasps, as I mentioned, of the kind of moral crusade, the moral order that was so characteristic of the progressive era. After World War One, especially after 1919 and 1920, and going into the 1920s as a decade, the disillusionment and the cynicism that much of the world felt coming out of the war. That many people were asking themselves, what was this war fought for? Why was there so much paid for in blood and money and material? What was there to show for it? And the conclusion that many people were drawing was not much. That if all of that utter devastation was simply to maintain the status quo and a large degree, then that was going to keep people and cultivate a high degree of cynicism, which is exactly what happened. And because of that, this is going to undercut the reform movements not only within the United States but also across much of the Western parts of the globe, the Western world. Uh, so World War One, in many respects, served as the death knell for the progressive era within U.S. history. And what's interesting is that some progressives, some reformers, even recognized that and were so insistent upon the U.S. staying out of World War One for that very fact. Meanwhile, other progressives believed that it was their, again, kind of moral um, obligation or moral responsibility to become engaged and to declare war on um, the Central Powers like Germany and Austro-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. That since the U.S. was becoming more progressive, kind of more um, providing for more of its citizens in a more direct way, that now the world had to be kind of brought to that same kind of epiphany. But again, by 1920, that was in tatters. The progressive era was over. The Roaring Twenties, as they were known, focused instead on things like self indulgence, where you see society beginning to orient itself towards material comfort and wealth, kind of a live for today mentality, which we've kind of seen and discussed at length at other periods in world history, specifically things like the Black Death. Here we see it in the 1920s, where there's this idea of reckless abandon that with a cynical attitude, many people believed, well, I might as well enjoy myself because I can't really affect any change or serious change to the status quo. So I'm just going to see to my own kind of self satisfaction. And so as a result, people begin to retreat from the public sphere and public activism and public engagement. Isolation is kind of the mantra of this day and age of the 1920s. To also retreat from reality in many cases that they don't want to put up with, they don't want to recognize, they don't want to address or have to deal with the hardships of daily life or the injustices. Um, and so it's much easier. It's more uh, uh, common for people to simply just withdraw and make their own lives as comfortable as possible. In some cases, there was also a period within, particularly U.S. society, for a time of exploration as far as social empowerment was concerned. So even though the bulk of U.S. society, mainstream American society, was apathetic, cynical, that didn't mean that there were subsections of American society that saw an opportunity to advance their own interests at their own hands. One of the best examples of this came or can be seen in the African American community. Um, we see here the effects of what's known as the Great Migration, where African Americans were able to relocate from the southern states, from the geography of the American South, to northern cities in order to fill large amounts of vacancies within factories, um, to take up the process of, you um, creating, constructing the weapons necessary for the war effort. The workers that had been in those factories were being drafted into the military, and so as a result, there was a great great need for replacement labor. It should also be noted that African Americans served in large numbers within the American Armed Forces in World War One as well. That number total topped out at some 380,000 African American veterans, 200,000 of which were sent to Europe. And when that happens and they move into France, and they begin to be, you know, deployed in forward positions, in many cases, French society began to see African American soldiers as liberators. And this was crucial because it instilled a redefinition of a sense of self for many African American individuals. Um, and again, this is characteristic of travel in many cases, that people learned as much about themselves as they did about the cultures or the people that were in these new lands and new countries of the world itself. So, really, for the first time, African Americans got exposure to a different uh, identity. That people began to perceive them and differently than what they had known or how they had been perceived, particularly in the public sphere. Um, you know, for much, if not all, of their lives. And so when the African American veterans are exposed to this, this means that they have like a new sense of self. It brings a certain level, a growing level of self confidence, self awareness, and that is something that never goes away. I mean that is brought back even after the war is over, and would serve as kind of the core of the African American community beginning to see to its own um, uh, sense of self and kind of cultivating that and beginning to kind of revel in that. This plays directly into what is known as the Harlem Renaissance, a active, vivid, robust community. Um, of Black artists, writers, which would give voice and expression to the Black experience in the United States itself. One um, author recorded this as a spiritual coming of age for the African American community. Writers included the likes of Langston Hughes and W.E.B. Du Bois. Dancers included the likes of Josephine Baker, singers like Paul Robeson, and musicians like Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, Cab Calloway, and Fats Waller. So we see here this, uh, you know, um, uh, collection of cultural icons within the African American community during this period of time. And it wasn't only just cultural kind of awareness. There was also a sense of economic purpose and self empowerment as well. Marcus Garvey is one of the best examples of this during the 1920s. You see an image of him in the lower corner here on the slide. Marcus Garvey was a social, political, and economic activist. I mean, he was all for the empowerment of the African American community or communities across the United States. And he believed that through um, the establishing of commercial interests such as his Black Star line, that he could help create an African American economic engine within the broader capitalist system of the nation as a whole. That the African American community would be able to become more self sufficient um, as a business community, which would mean that the African American community could retain much larger quantities of its own wealth and see to the needs of the African American community, or again, communities across the country as a whole. And this would be within the broader framework of, perceived white capitalism. So it's endeavors, strategies such as that, that really kind of bring about a new sense of purpose, a new sense of mission, that communities like the African American community in particular are going to begin to coalesce around in many cases. I mentioned how, on a large scale, kind of on a macro scale, you might say, that generally speaking, societies like the United States, like Britain and France, all began to retract from any type of engagement or activism on the international stage. That was the case for a host of nations around the world. In many respects, the United States, of course, like I just said, led the way. The U.S. transformed the U.S. from a debtor nation into a creditor nation. So this means that the United States ended up with a large amount of wealth within the country itself, largely as a result of the commercial transactions and the profits generated from selling war material, food, supplies to the powers of France and England, and other allies during the war. So the United States, economically speaking, was in a pretty good position following the armistice and the Paris Peace Conference. But again, the United States showed its immaturity during this period of time as a world power because it was not well prepared for this new role as an international financier. Again, the U.S. was primarily preoccupied with wanting to um, uh, take advantage of that newfound wealth for itself without understanding the obligations that being a world power brought to this new kind of role for the country. In the early 1920s, 1921 and 22, the US government raised tariffs in order to keep out cheap European goods, which was going to, of course, withhold US dollars from those European populations that needed money, specifically dollars most eagerly, to pay off wartime debts to the United States itself. And so because of that lack of foresight, it really kind of came back to hurt the United States in the long run. Now, it would take some time for that to happen, but it would come in the form of the um, Great Depression in the 1930s, and of course, the political extremism that emerged coming out of the economic depression itself. The United States during the 20s, it wanted to keep its economy expanding, which led to an increasingly isolationist-like tendency to keep out foreigners, keep out foreign goods, um, and thus again shirking their responsibilities as a world-leading creditor nation, the world's strongest world power at the time. So again, you see this paradox. It should be pretty obvious. At the point the U.S. became the wealthiest um, world power, it also wanted to remove itself from the world stage to reap the benefits without taking on any of the liabilities or responsibilities. And so the European response was quite simple. It said, "Look, if you're not willing to take on these responsibilities, if you're not going to give us a fair shake at opening your markets to our goods, then cancel the debt that we owe you because there's no other real way uh, to meet those obligations to pay off those loans that we owe you." The United States responded in several different ways. Well, actually, two key different ways. That being the Dawes Plan of 1924, which extended loans to Germany in order for that country to keep up with its reparation payments. to Britain and France, among others, and then Britain and France could take that money and pay back the United States on the loans that it owed to the U.S. Um, so it's extending out the payment plan, you might say, for the loans that Germany had taken out from the United States. The Young Plan of 1929 extended the time frame that Germany could pay back its reparations. Um, it's pushing out the timeline for the eventually paying back these loans. These are band-aids. I mean, these are stopgap measures. So you can see by the mid to late 1920s, the world is already beginning to suffer economically, even during the economic boom of the 1920s. There are some warning signs that the economic stress is very much alive. I've got just a couple minutes left. Let me tell you. Okay. Yeah, I'll start getting into kind of other areas of the world during the 1920s. Others were fed up with international relations as well. There was a preoccupation with quelling internal dissent. One of the best examples of this comes and can be seen during the Russian Revolution and the Russian Civil War following the Russian Revolution, lasting from about 1918 to 1922. This is where you have red Russians versus white Russians. Red Russians were kind of coming from the communist camp, Bolsheviks and Mensheviks. White Russians were those that either wanted to, it was kind of a coalition of royalists that wanted to try and bring back the Tsar, uh, liberal Democrats who wanted to kind of have a constitutional order established within Russia, or kind of anything in between those that were just simply opposed to um, a more communist styled ideology. By 1922, however, the communists were able to consolidate power. They were able to crush the forces arrayed against them. Again, the broad coalition of white Russians made it so that there was almost as much infighting between those different factions as there was, kind of um, conflict with their ideological adversaries, the Red Russians. Lenin emerges as the political leader, the head of state within Russia itself. And he and his inner circle begin to set out a series of policies for Russia's economic development. Russia itself, after World War I, was a state in ruins. And so it resorted to things like war communism, which was a state run economy, seeing this as a necessity amidst the Civil War itself to really kind of galvanize the economic um, resources of the country under communist control, and to get those goods and those resources to where they needed to be for the success, the communist success as they saw it. Uh, there was also what's going to be the new economic policy, which I'll turn attention to in the next segment. So I'll be right back in just a moment.